Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. This is TowerGate day number 909, September 26, 2019, Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Wow, we have a hell of a news day to cover from yesterday. Unbelievable amount of information, so it's going to be hard to get through it all, but I'll do the best I can. Now, what I've done is I've gone and I've tried to sort of almost like go in order of the various things that played out yesterday. And some of these are in order, some of these are not, but for the most part, I tried to stay in order of how things were unfolded yesterday once they released Trump's transcript with the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky. There's a lot here, so I'm going to go through this as best I can, as quickly as I can, and hopefully we'll get through it all, but there's a lot here. So, so bear with me, and we'll see how we do. Okay, so Trump's transcript with the Ukrainian president was released at about 10 o'clock a.m. And of course we learned very quickly, because it was only 5 short pages. I read it at about 10:30 in the morning, and it was pretty clear from reading the transcript that there was absolutely no quid pro quo. What you essentially got from the 5-page letter was 2 leaders, both who were brought into office on the wave of this populist nationalist movement, and both leaders were brought in, and this happened early on in their conversation, where Zelensky said, yeah, well, you know, I also ran on draining the swamp. I kind of took that from you. And so he's telling Trump about how he used a lot of what he learned from Trump's campaign in his campaign, and that he also ran on draining the swamp because of the incredible corruption that they have in Ukraine, just like the incredible corruption that we have here. Trump ran on cleaning up the corruption, and so did Mr. Zelensky. And that's why their topic veered off into things having to do with election interference in Ukraine and things and such. They were having a discussion which quickly moved into the area why both of them feel that they got elected, which was to drain their own respective swamps and put an end, or at least put a huge dent in the political corruption. This is what you essentially get out of the 5 pages. As far as a quid pro quo, as far as making any threats, as far as using Trump dropping Biden's name 8 times, all of that turned out to be bunk, complete bullshit. So it's become obvious to me now. It took the whole day for me to see the whole day's events play out. But as we sit here at about 8 o'clock in the evening, Eastern Standard Time, on Wednesday evening, it's pretty obvious to me that when Giuliani was on TV a couple days ago and he said, yeah, the Democrats are walking into a huge trap. And it appears more and more obvious that this was not just like a passive sort of trap. This was an active trap. This is a trap that Trump and Giuliani and probably Parscale and the rest of them put together with all this talk about impeachment. When this whistleblower comment came out, it looks like they have immediately got together and strategized and probably said, hey, wait a minute, they're going to try to use Ukraine. Oh my good. You know, it's like if they want to go down the Ukraine road, man, there is so much there that's damaging to them. I can't believe they're going to do it. But if they actually do it, let's have a plan. It's obvious to me at this point that this was clearly a trap that was set. The Democrats, when they started talking about the whistleblower, and maybe this would lead to impeachment and all this sort of thing, it's obvious that Trump's team immediately got together and figured out a way that they were going to combat this. And they obviously set this trap. And boy, did they set a trap, and the Democrats jumped into it with both feet, and it is ugly for them at this point, and it's going to get much worse. And the reason why I say I think it's a trap is because as soon as the announcements came out, first they put out the transcript, and then that was followed a couple hours later by the Department of Justice report about the whistleblower and what they found about the whistleblower. And as soon as that report came out, within literally minutes, they started running an ad in all of these states where these Democrats who won in the midterm elections in Republican strongholds or places where it was very close, or purple states or red states, all the Democrats who won in those areas who signed on to Pelosi's impeachment, they immediately began running a very, very kick-ass ad in those voting districts. And the ad, of course, I don't know if you've seen it, but it talks about the Ukraine corruption. It shows the video with Biden, threatening the firing of the prosecutor, taking credit for having doing that. It talks about the Bidens in China, the Bidens in Ukraine. It's a totally targeting ad. It was professionally produced, obviously, from the Trump campaign, RNC, I think, actually, the RNC. So it was already in the can and waiting and ready to go. And as soon as that DOJ report came out, boom, they started running that ad in every one of those districts where Democrats took Republican seats in the midterms. And not only that, but they already had their staffers all across the country. The GOP had their staffers totally bulked up at their phone banks where they take calls for people wanting to make donations. They were prepared for mass amounts of donations, and they were absolutely correct. The ads really, it's a great ad if you haven't seen it, targeting these Democrats. And by this time, at this point in the evening, about 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, it's been about 6 hours since the ad started running in all these voting districts. The GOP has raised $5 million, and I don't know if that's directly to Trump. I think it's actually to the GOP. So they've already raised $5 million off that ad, and it came out, boom, immediately. It was ready to go in the can. And, of course, you can see all these other things that came out today that we didn't know of. Clearly, Trump knew, Giuliani knew, Pascal knew, the people around Trump knew, Attorney General Barr obviously knew. They obviously knew all these other little things that have now come out that nobody was talking about before that. So now this stuff is all just coming out like a unbelievable. So all these things that we're about to get to here in a few moments, they knew. And they knew that these things were going to drop as soon as the DOJ came out with their statement, which followed the release of the transcripts between Trump and Zelensky. So now that you know that, let's go through sort of these events as they came out. So, and once again, let's just keep moving because I'm short on time. Okay, so anyway, the statement comes out about the transcript comes out about 10 o'clock. No quid pro quo, as you can clearly read, and of course, shortly thereafter, about 2 hours later, the DOJ comes out with their statement, and we'll be getting to that here in a little while, where I'll be actually reading that part of that statement to you. So then the next thing that happens, and again, this was all pre-planned. This was all pre-planned. No doubt, this was a trap set by Trump and the Republicans for Pelosi and the Democrats. So the next thing that happens is that you have McCarthy, Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise, Liz Cheney, and one other person, I can't remember. They come out and they have a press conference. And, of course, they're hammering Pelosi. And this is very shortly after the transcripts were released. And, of course, they're pointing out the fact that when you take something like what Pelosi did with no facts and you use that to launch what she considered a formal impeachment hearing, that is serious business. Remember, she is the Speaker of the House. She's the third person in line for the presidency. And they make the argument in their speeches here, particularly Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, makes the point that Pelosi should step down. And this is, and I do believe that if this fallout that we see right now continues for the next 2 to 3 days, and I believe it very well could go into the weekend, and as more of this stuff hits home, I think that we could see a lot of pressure on Pelosi to be forced to step down. And she should absolutely resign. This was unprecedented. We've never seen this before. I've lived through 2 impeachments in my life, and when you have these impeachments and hearings and things like that, before you have a full impeachment hearing or anything like that, you better have some damn solid evidence when you call for impeachment of a president or even hearings. And Pelosi had none of it. It was all speculation. It was all propaganda. And, of course, Trump called her bluff by actually releasing the statement. And, of course, they had all this other information that they knew would be hugely damaging to Democrats. But Pelosi personally took the bait, and she should step down. She should step down as Speaker because what she did is unprecedented. You cannot have this. You cannot have the Speaker of the House. I mean, her members can get very political. They can push and shove for all sorts of things. But when you're the Speaker of the House, you cannot go throwing impeachment around like this. And the fact that she did that, I think, is that McCarthy is right. That absolutely, and I think that you will be hearing over the next 2 to 3 days more and more calls for Pelosi to step down. She didn't just badly misplay this. This is more than just a bad political play. This goes to the heart of her constitutional authority as the Speaker of the House and the responsibility that goes along with it. And she clearly abused it for purely political purposes. There was never any facts. She didn't even know what this transcript said. She may have been told something, but whatever they told her was not the truth because, quite honestly, she looks very, very bad, and I would not be the least bit surprised. Certainly there'll be calls for her to step down. She's pretty pig-headed and loves her power, so it'll take a lot to force her out. It'll really take Democrats to force her out. She won't do it just because of Republicans, but it may take Democrats to force her out. But I think I'd say it's 50-50 at this point. But I would not be the least bit surprised if that's what this leads to, and it should. Then you get the Adam Bug-Eyed Fool going on CNN and making his statement. Well, he needs to be removed as well. He needs to be removed from the head of the House Intelligence Committee. Clearly, he was involved in this as well. He also has come out calling strongly for impeachment hearings, making claims that were completely untrue about what he knew about this transcript. Clearly, he is not fit to head up the House Intelligence Committee, and I would certainly expect that on that committee, certainly from the Republicans, but Congress-wide, you could also hear calls for Schiff should also resign as head of the House Intelligence Committee. He and Nancy Pelosi should be gone, and I would include Nadler and the heads of any of these other committees who use this phony whistleblower hoax to try to go for impeachment. You cannot use a tool like impeachment, as powerful of a tool as that is, to use that for political propaganda. That is just a no-go, and it's horribly abusive, and it's hurting the Democrats badly right now. It's going to get much worse, but these people have gone too far. Too far. They need to step down, and there will be calls for that. Then we get Trump. He does a press conference with the president. Now, the timing of this was beautiful. They purposely timed this. Trump and his team timed this release. They wanted to make sure they did it when they did it because they knew that a couple hours after the release that Trump would be having a little presser with the president of Ukraine. And so this all fit perfectly. You can see the way that all these things lined up today, that it was absolutely 100% a plot by Trump and his team to entrap the Democrats and catch them in the trap, and boy did it ever pan out. And it worked beautifully. It went seamlessly, and it continues to come out as we speak. So then he does his interview, and there, of course, the president of Ukraine essentially says, yeah, there was no pressure or anything like that, and whatever. So he doesn't speak great English, so he didn't elaborate too much, but essentially, he makes the point that, yeah, I was not under pressure. You can read the transcript for yourself. It's just not there. Read it. So then we also learned today a report comes out. Remember, people have had this information. They're sitting on these stories. The Trump campaign did a very good job of knowing that certain reporters had certain stories, and they made sure to have them not bust them out until after the release came out. Because as soon as the release came out, boom, Washington Examiner, PJ Media, Citizen Free Press, just stories coming out, Gateway Pundit, one right after the other, Daily Caller, from journalists who didn't just simultaneously, all within a period of 2 hours, have these stories and just release them. They've obviously had these stories, and they obviously released them in a very coordinated manner, very calculated. So we get the story then that comes out that the whistleblower's lawyer, this Andrew Bakaj, B-A-K-A-J, who we, of course, know was a staffer for the Right Reverend Clinton, who works for a law firm that represents whistleblowers and, in fact, pays people to whistleblow on Republicans, by the way. They're a Democrat operative organization. We find out that this Andrew Bakaj donated to Joe Biden. So the questions that they need to bring this guy, and I'm sure they will, someone will call this guy in to testify, and someone will bring Mr. Backhadge in, and I'm sure that they're going to ask him two questions. They're going to ask him if his firm paid this whistleblower, and they're also going to try to find out who leaked this information to the whistleblower. Because I think when we find out who that was, we're going to find out who was really behind this plot. And I know who was the mastermind behind it. It's the Rotten Reverend. But the Rotten Reverend uses multiple straw people in between her and the eventual target. So you have to dig to get to the Rotten Reverend. But you'll find her right at the bottom of the heap. We also, of course, know that the acting DNI is going to testify tomorrow. And there's a story about him today that we'll get to in just a moment. So then after we get the transcript of the phone call between Trump and Zelensky, then the DOJ, about 2 hours later, releases their report on this whistleblower. And the report basically says, and you can read it for yourself, says that the whistleblower was anti-Trump, he had a Trump bias, that his complaint was based on hearsay and bogus allegations, and that he was a supporter of one of the Democrats who are running against Trump, one of Trump's opponents. They don't name that person, but you know, I'm sure we'll learn that as well. Then we get this story that drops, and again, this is all happening almost in real time as we're moving throughout the day. Then the next story drops that on May 4th, 2018, Democrat senators Menendez, Leahy, Menendez, Leahy, and Dick Durbin, they all sent a signed letter to the Ukraine government urging them to investigate President Trump and to cooperate with the Mueller investigation in doing so. These three Democratic senators on May 4th, 2018, sending a letter to the Ukraine government telling them that they want them to, urging them to investigate President Trump and to cooperate, giving information to Mueller. And they also go on to state in that letter, literally, you talk about coercion, they state in this letter that and I believe they're writing to Poroshenko, that if he wants to enjoy Democratic support, that he needs to do this. He needs to investigate Trump and continue the 4 investigations that are going on, and that he needs to cooperate and give materials to Mueller if he wants to continue receiving Democratic support for Ukraine. Then, we have the Rotten Reverend Clinton freaking out because this plot by the Reverend was meant to take out Biden and, of course, to damage Trump. But if you look at the letter and the conversation, the transcript, you'll see that Trump brings up, with Zelensky, he brings up CrowdStrike and the activities of the DNC, or not, he doesn't say the DNC, but the activities of, he talks about somehow the CrowdStrike company and being something related to Ukraine. He talks about something about there being a server there in Ukraine that has something to do with CrowdStrike. Okay, so this is going to, so what Trump's talking about is the interference in the 2016 election with the Ukrainian government and various corrupt people working with the Clinton campaign and the DNC, and of course this corrupt company CrowdStrike, which we've talked an awful lot about, which has a lot of roots and a lot of players in Ukraine. And this, of course, once Trump said this got the Rotten Reverend Clinton 15 minutes after this transcript was released. Just 15 minutes later, the Rotten Reverend Clinton comes out on Twitter. She's freaking out, and she says Trump betrayed the country. She supports impeachment, and that likely, what triggered her was likely the mention of CrowdStrike, this server supposedly being somewhere in Ukraine, and of course the corrupt people in the U.S., and he's talking about Democrats and the Clinton campaign coordinating with corrupt Ukrainians. And that's where the conversation started, and it's after that that Zelensky brings up Giuliani and that sort of thing, and it goes on to the Bidens. Then we get Giuliani tweeting out at 12:20 a.m. That would have been very, very early in the morning. Before any of this happened, he tweets out that Chris Murphy, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, had threatened Ukraine's government if they did not drop their investigation of Joe Biden. So here's another Democrat threatening Ukraine if they continue to investigate Joe Biden. That would have been Chris Murphy. He's got some questions to answer, right along with Leahy and the others, Menendez. Now, later in the afternoon, we actually have a legal analyst who goes on CNN. He's one of their paid legal analysts. He goes on CNN. His name is Ian Bremmer, and he actually lays some straight truth on CNN and really quiets the room down in there. He says, well, looking at this transcript and everything, he says, Biden does have a problem. He says Burisma clearly paid Hunter Biden to sell influence. And he admits also that there is no quid pro quo in anything Trump said. So here is a CNN paid legal analyst coming on saying, oh yeah, Biden's got a lot of problems here. And the only reason they would have paid Hunter Biden is for influence, because they got nothing else out of it. And then then he volunteers that, Trump had no quid pro quo. And that silenced the entire group of commentators there at CNN. So clearly, the Right Reverend Clinton has given the word, and they're allowing people now to come on even CNN and MSNBC and trash Biden and say, oh yeah, this is a problem. So the Right Reverend Clinton definitely succeeded with this plot in a big way, but I think there's a boomerang here that may come back and bite her in the ass as well. She knew it was risky, but my guess is that she thought, well, if I can, because Hillary Clinton obviously is being told by deep staters in Ukraine and the State Department that are still there, is probably being kept informed of what's going on. You have Durham over there in Ukraine. You have Solomon investigating in Ukraine. You have Rudy Giuliani in Ukraine. You have a lot of things going on, a lot of people investigating over in Ukraine. Now, the Right Reverend Clinton's getting all this information. So she needs something to shake these people off her tail. She really can't do too much of that. They're going to do what they're going to do. But what she can do is she can blow up Biden and so that sort of distract people from talking about her and the DNC and what they did with Ukraine in 2016 to give them something much bigger and juicier, which is Biden. So she's trying to switch the narrative, get people to focus on Ukraine, to get them focusing on Biden and not so much about her and the DNC. So in addition to taking out Biden, and of course we know from Devin Nunes, who just reminded us all that the Right Reverend Clinton campaign first used this Ukraine information on Biden back when he considered throwing his hat into the race in 2015. And this is what the Right Reverend Clinton used in 2015 to get Biden not to jump in the race. And this is what she's using now, coming back at him with even more to get him out of the race. And I'd say she's been successful. I would say Biden is toast. And what do we have today? We have a poll coming out. Now, true, this is Rasmussen, but it's not, I prefer to see a lot of polls, but we have just today, in one day, literally, Trump overtakes Biden. A week ago, Biden was seen as being up 8 points over Trump. Today, or when you're watching this video, will be yesterday, Wednesday, Trump 47, Biden 43. Trump not only beating Biden, but beating him by 4 points. That's a 12-point move in 1 week. Well done, Rotten Reverend Clinton. So, the Rotten Reverend Clinton has clearly stirred up a hell of a hornet's nest to deep six Biden. But like I said, Trump is interested in this CrowdStrike stuff having to do with Ukraine and the emails, so there still could be a boomerang effect. I guess the Right Reverend Clinton is hoping that the Biden stuff in Ukraine overshadows her criminal activity in Ukraine. So then we get to later in the afternoon, a couple hours after the transcript's released, and we get the DOJ statement from the Department of Justice, and their statement is that Trump never asked Attorney General Barr to contact Ukraine about Joe Biden or his son's activities in Ukraine. The Attorney General has not communicated with Ukraine on this or any other matter. He has not spoken to Giuliani. And they've looked at the transcript and they find that there's no problem with the call, no laws were broken. Now, remember, they're talking specifically about Attorney General Barr. not the DOJ, and not Durham. Because the statement continues, and we'll get back to it here in a minute, where they actually do talk about what John Durham is doing in Ukraine. So then another thing that I noticed about this time of the day, about 3, 4 o'clock, that the Twitter army had gone onto a major attack from the left onto all Republicans. They had targeted, I guess, certain Republicans, knowing good and well they would come out and make a tweet after the release came out. And so they already had an army of left-wingers on Twitter ready to go to attack Republicans on their Twitter accounts after the feed came out, to try to, sway the Twitter community. Then we get the idiot AOC coming out and making a statement later in the afternoon saying that Democrats who oppose impeachment should expect more heat. She's doubling down. Here they are getting murdered and crucified by this time of the day, 4 o'clock. They're getting crucified. And here's AOC saying that Democrats who oppose impeachment should expect even more heat. Oh, man. So then we get the Washington Examiner article that comes out from Dunleavy. And he says, in his article, he quotes some more of the Justice Department spokeswoman, who is Carrie Kupek. She's the DOJ spokeswoman. And he puts a couple paragraphs of her quote from what I was just reading, where she says that the Justice Department is admitting that John Durham is looking into Ukraine involvement in the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation. Not Barr, Durham. And that Durham has received documents from Ukrainians who are not members of the government. She also says that Horowitz has spoken with Durham and that Durham is handling the criminal referrals coming from Horowitz's investigation. Durham is handling criminal referrals coming from Horowitz's investigation. Now we know why Comey wasn't charged and why McCabe has not yet been charged. Because Durham has got that stuff, and he's probably got sealed indictments, or he's just putting it in his tally for all the other things he's going to have on these two characters and many others. Then we get Biden being asked about this, and he comes out and he calls for Trump's impeachment. Man, old Biden has no idea the kind of shitstorm he's involved in right now. He's too stupid to know how effed up he is. Then we get the Penguin, that nut. He comes out later in the afternoon, around 5 o'clock, and he's demanding that Attorney General Barr recuse himself. The Penguin wants Barr to recuse himself. Well, that ain't going to happen, I can assure you of that. Then we get another story that drops in the Federalist. And this story dropped about late in the afternoon as well. I don't know exactly what time. I stumbled onto it maybe around 5 or 6 o'clock. And in this particular article, we find out that this attorney, who was formerly a Clinton staffer, the attorney for the whistleblower, Andrew Bakaj, B-A-K-A-J, worked at the CIA, and he regularly retweets John Brennan. And he brags about running political operations on Trump nominees to torpedo them on his Twitter account. In fact, here is an example of a tweet that he sent out on, this was actually yesterday at 2 o'clock a.m. 2 o'clock in the morning, this lawyer is on Twitter. And he writes, quote, "Thus far, I have had a role in having a CIA Inspector General removed and forced another to withdraw his nomination for the position. We've had Congressional Intelligence Committee's involvement. No small feat. I am very patient and effective." That is what he put on his Twitter account at 2 a.m. on September the 25th. That would have been yesterday. Admitting that he's a CIA deep stater, admitting that he's had a CIA IG removed and forced another one to withdraw, admitting that he's involved with congressional committees, which he says is no small feat, and he says he's very patient and effective. This is the lawyer for the whistleblower. who was a Hillary Clinton staffer. Then we get a story coming out in PJ Media. PJ Media. The story comes out and says that this is another tactical and major salvo. And the author of this piece is Stephen Green. And Stephen Green says that he suggests that the rotten Reverend Clinton is behind this. Oh, really? I never would have thought of that. And then he asked the question, do the Clintons have it in for Joe Biden? And he says it's even worse than what they did to Bernie. Then, at 2:44, the Washington Post runs a fake news story that the acting DNI, Joe Maguire, threatened to resign if he couldn't speak freely about the whistleblower complaint, suggesting that the White House was pressuring him. Well, less than 1 hour after the Washington Post story comes out, Maguire himself comes out and knocks down that story as 100% fake news, 100% false. Then we have, later in the evening, Ron Johnson, who's head of a committee, I forget which committee it is, I think it's oversight in the Senate, saying that he is now considering opening an investigation into the Biden's activities in Ukraine. What a day. And there's still more fallout to come. This is clearly when Giuliani said they set a huge trap and the Democrats walked right into it. They are not lying. This thing, I don't think I've ever seen this type of blowback and this big a mistake. This is the biggest mistake I've ever seen a speaker make. I mean, Gingrich made a really big mistake when he really went after Clinton. And, of course, it costed the Republicans in the following election. And, of course, Gingrich got ran out of town. He had to resign. And that's the same thing that I believe is likely to happen to Pelosi. She did the exact same thing Gingrich did. But what she did is far worse. Far worse than even what Gingrich did. And I think there will be pressure on her to resign. Let's remember, as I've mentioned this before, let's go through this one more time. This is very easy. Very easy. When Christopher Steele was interviewed in the given his deposition in the case over in the UK, the BuzzFeed, or no, it was the case of the oligarch. What was his name? Gubarev. In the Gubarev deposition, Christopher Steele was asked who brought him in or who was paying him to do his work and what was he being paid to do. Christopher Steele said in his deposition that he was being paid by a law firm representing Hillary Clinton. He did not say he was being paid by Confusion GPS. He said he was being paid by a law firm representing the Hillary Clinton campaign. And he said the reason that he was hired was to gather evidence that could be used by Hillary Clinton's legal team to challenge the results of the election if she lost. The rotten Reverend Clinton's plot, her plan, was that if she could not defeat Trump with this October surprise, and of course she couldn't because no one would publish it, if she couldn't defeat Trump and if she lost, she was going to use the information that Steele put together. Keep in mind that Steele's not putting anything together. It's all Hillary and her people, Blumenthal, Shearer, Glenn Simpson, Mary Jacoby, Nellie Orr, this little crew, a home-cooked sort of deal. Steele was nothing more than the salesman, the guy who could give it credibility, the guy that could go out and sell it. The rotten Reverend Clinton was planning on using the dirt that she created that they gave to Steele to go sell. She was planning on using that to challenge the election in federal court, hoping that a federal judge would overturn the results of the election and make her the president and take it away from Trump. That is what this whole thing was about from the very beginning, and it's never stopped. It has never stopped. The rotten Reverend Clinton, as I have said, and as we will find when we get to the bottom of this stinking ass barrel of fish, the rotten Reverend Clinton is the mastermind behind all of this. She planned, organized, directed, and controlled all of it. And she still is. And she doesn't give a damn about Biden. She's behind this as well. She's taking out old Joe. And she doesn't give a damn what she does to the Democratic Party or to this country. She wants to punish everyone in this country. Republicans who didn't vote for her, independents, Democrats who didn't come out in big enough numbers for her. She wants to punish this country because they kept her from getting her power. That is the bottom line. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See you guys. Bye.